Hi, my name is Dr. Ezrin. Our topic is personal risk and what influence our safety decision.
When we look at to the complexities of most work environments, we find that worker behavior is influenced by a number of factors. People do not make decisions in a vacuum. If in your organization has the people who are telling you, for example, that's how I was shown to do it. Why would he do that when he knew the hazards? She had done it 100 times before with no problem. I do riskier stuff than this at home. It won't be that bad. Let's give a try. When in your organization has someone who are telling you that kind of statement, in the organization actually have a risk tolerance issue. Humans thinking, surrounding and past consequences and cultural reinforcers play a critical part in human decisions. Peer observation and feedback is just one example of possible inferences. One of the most effective and sustainable strategies to improve safety involves with understanding, measuring and managing the influences on risk-taking. As I did mention, if you have heard statements such as the above at your organization, you actually have a risk tolerance issue. Risk tolerance is defined as the willingness of a worker or a group to take safety risks. So in this chapter, we will look at to the factors that influence how much risk is acceptable to individual or groups. Based on this risk tolerance identifications, it will help to formulate or to identify the solution to minimize the risk tolerance. Understanding the risk tolerance issue in a workplace culture can be the key in improving safety performance. In one situation, when a supervisor or peer sees a potential risk, they express concern to the workers involved and gather insight by asking about the rationale for performing a task in a certain manner. Towards the end of the conversation, the response to the question provides profound knowledge that is classified into big four categories. The four categories for that statement in the situations are perception, habit, obstacle, and barrier. Let's take a look at into details about the four categories that is classified based on the situation. The first factor to influence the risk tolerance is categorized as perception. Risk perception deals with the ability of workers to understand how a hazard could result in an incident or harm. It is dependent on their background, knowledge, and their ability to predict the consequences being exposed to the hazard. Hazard recognition is not just being about seeing a hazard. It is about mentally acknowledging it could also happen to me. Many workers who have been injured had the knowledge of the potential hazard but lack of a sense of vulnerability. This often is due to the inability to identify the potential consequences of low probability risk. Unfortunately, the common measurement in safety tend to perpetuate the undesirable mentality, which is zero accidents means we are safe. It is safe actually as long as you do not get injured. If someone frequently takes a risk but remains injury-free, the perception of risk tends to become skewed. When the rationale for the risk is questioned, The response one will hear will be similar to one or more of the following. For example, in my opinion, in my experience, I don't think it's a problem because I've done it before and not gotten hurt. What's wrong with it? Because it is safe previously. The second factor that may influence the risk tolerance is habit. Habit is an acquired behavior pattern regularly followed until it has become almost involuntary. A person will make a decision to perform a task in a particular manner until subconscious mental templates are created. Once enough experience has been obtained, the individual no longer consciously has to think about the task. When is the last time you had to consciously think about opening a door? You have developed a template for opening doors, and the thinking now occurs subconsciously. This is similar to how a work habit is formed. Habits, like perceptions, are within the control of worker to change. However, they are not changed in the same manner. Information often will change a perception, but it will not necessarily change a habit. Habits are deeply ingrained and rooted into the patterns of human behavior and require repeated antecedent or reminder. The required frequency and spacing of these reminders will differ depending on the complexity of the task and the length of time the habit has been formed. When a question about the rationale for a risk taking, for example, the habitual response will often sound like, "That's the way I always do it. I don't know. I didn't think about it. It's the way we always do around here." The third factor is categorized as obstacle. An obstacle is something that makes it difficult to perform a task safely or take a safety precaution. Obstacles often are inadvertently created during design or modification of workstations or operational processes. Common obstacles include inconvenient location or difficult access to tools and equipment. Often, the removing or reduction of obstacle is not within the control of workers. When questioned about the rationale for a risk, a response to an obstacle often will sound like, "It would be difficult to do it has that way because if I do it that way, this could be happen," something like that. "It takes too long to do it that way because of here and there obstacle."
The last factor to contribute the risk tolerance issue is barrier. Barriers should be the first things to which you respond because they negate the ability to safely perform the task or take safety precautions that control exposure to risk. Complete unavailability of correct tools or equipment or lack of anchor or tie-off point for fall protection, for example, are the examples of the barriers. When questioned about the rationale for a risk, a response to a barrier often will sound like, "There is no way," "Is it impossible because of blah blah blah," "I can't do this because of." Now you know the 4 big factors that might become the influential factors to the risk tolerance issue in your workplace. Once the influence has been identified and categorized, appropriate action can be taken to address it. For perception, for example, distribute information about the risk through training, articles or talk in safety meeting, and help from manager or supervisor can be done. Stress the importance of the particular risk in accident report, add risk avoidance techniques to the new employees in their orientations, and discuss risk and risk avoidance in pre-job briefing and shift hurdle. For habit influences, increase the number and frequency of reminders in target area through signage to prompt action, behavioral observation, offering reminder in safety and other meetings, creating a buddy system to have workers remind each other, and distributing pocket reminder cards. For obstacle and barriers influence, first, identify the issue from accident and observation data to determine exposure rate, and then define the potential impact of inaction and ask for help in removing the obstacle and barriers from management or engineering department. And finally, apply the hierarchy of the control. This is the holistic model that can be done as successful model due to its positive impact on culture, system, and individual actions. The traditional approach to correcting individuals often only solve a problem short term. Identifying and modifying influences produce long-term results that span generations of employees and managers. In BBS, we have to consider the four big factors that might influence our action in set up the BBS program. In other previous study, the author also sharing the 10 influential factors for risk tolerance. Let's take a look into details. 1. Overestimating capability or experience. Greater risks are tolerated when there is a belief in one's physical ability, strength, agility, reaction time, and reflexes in preventing an accident. A worker may overestimate their strength and will thus accept more risk when applying force, or may overestimate his or her agility and accept the risk of a poorly prepared working surface. This factor also relates to situations where an experienced worker will rely on his or her years of experience and knowledge of the task as justification for doing the work in a way that may have higher risk. The number 2 is familiarity with the task, or we can call it as complacency. This occurs when a worker has completed a task successfully multiple times and has the skill to complete it successfully without thinking, a state referred to as unconsciously competent. Research shows that workers in this state can become unaware of the potential hazards. This kind of autopilot complacency occurs without the worker having to refocus or refresh, thus creating a blind spot to potential hazards. The number 3 is seriousness of the outcome. Here, the increased risk is based on the premise that something could go wrong. However, the worker underestimates how serious the consequences might be. A worker may perceive the outcome of a hazard to be minor, possibly resulting in scratch or bruise, where in reality, the outcome could be significantly more serious. Voluntary action and being in control. There is an increased acceptance of risk in performing voluntary activities. Once we have made a decision to participate in activity, either work-based or off the job, a process called confirmation bias occurs, and we convince ourselves that it is safe despite the actual risk. This confirmation bias is exemplified when we have control or perceive that we have control over the task. Control gives us the feeling of confidence in our ability, and the underestimation of the risk occurs. The five influential factors is personal experience with a serious outcome. Personal reality event can stick with an individual for a long time, sometimes a lifetime. They can impact a person's decision on performing tasks they associate with an event, and it can result in being intolerance or any risk associated with a similar task. However, a worker who has never had a first-hand experience with a serious consequence will be prepared to accept more risk because they may be skeptical that something serious could happen. Newer workers need to hear first-hand accounts of past serious incidents to reduce their unconscious risk acceptance. The number 6 is cost of non-compliance. Personal costs can impact a person's decision to accept risk, and the individual can be influenced by how high the cost of non-compliance will be. If the cost of non-compliance, which is taking a risk, is going to be high, such as losing a job or receiving a fine or penalty, the person may decide to conduct themselves in a less risky manner. The seventh factor is overconfidence in the equipment. Overconfidence occurs when a worker places excessive or unwarranted trust that the equipment or tool will always perform exactly as designed. When a worker becomes familiar with particular tools and equipment and has not experienced any failures, he or she can become overly trusting that the equipment or tool will never fail. This can occur with simple equipment such as hand tools or even complex systems such as computer control. The next factor is overconfidence in personal protective equipment. Risks become more common when the limitation of the personal protective equipment, which is PPE, are not understood. Higher level of risk are accepted when workers are overconfident in the safety equipment they use and their belief that if something does go wrong, the PPE will keep them from harm. An example of this would be a perception that an impact-resistant glove could prevent a finger amputation. The next factor is profit or gain from the actions. The risk tolerance factor stems from the desire for profit, gain, and/or recognition. This occurs at an individual level where a person may profit from their own action. This could be finishing sooner by taking shortcut, for example, or it could be a company tiring to profit from taking greater risk. The gain could be extrinsic with direct financial impact, or could be intrinsic with a gain of pride, status, or a general good feeling. People may dangerously increase their risk tolerance when the rewards are perceived to be greater than the risk. And the last influential factor is role models accepting risk. The level of risk accepted by our role model and mentors will directly impact the level of risk individuals will accept. Workers will watch their peers, supervisors, and mentors to determine how they should behave and proceed. Modeling after a mentor or role model who accept risk will result in the worker accepting the risk. Determining who the role model are in a group and what their risk tolerance is very important. Alright, for the conclusion, it is very important for an organization, specifically its safety professional and line manager, to understand the influential factor for the risk tolerance. They must first understand the principle behind each of the factors. 2. Know how to identify the presence of each factors in the workplace. 3. Understand how to address each factors and to reduce the risk. And the last one, be able to explain and articulate the factor for frontline workers and supervisor to help them reduce the acceptance of the risk.